please.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and consider an annual report on the department's Clean Marina program.
Mr. Conman, again.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, all of you have been on the board long enough to have heard this report at least once, and as you know, folks like Commissioner Kelly have heard it a lot of times. Each year what we tend to do is we update several traditional areas of the report, typically the 6 elements of the report that, of the program that we've had since 2002. Well, Director Reedman and I were talking about tonight's report before I started working on it, and what we've decided to do, while we've got an extensive staff report, it's like 10 pages with 8 attachments or 7 attachments, and I would like to alert the public, by the way, when I'm going to tell them in a minute how to access that report. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to be a little briefer. We're going to condense some of this for presentation purposes and try and concentrate on those things that we try to keep out of the bay, and then the ways we go about measuring they make sure that they didn't get in the bay. And instead of going through each one of the 6 elements, which are all covered in the staff report, and for folks that want to look at the various items in the staff report down to the minutia of the statistics, they're welcome to do so, and they would the easiest way to do that is to go on the city's website, santabarbaraca.gov, and on the right-hand column you'll see boards and commissions. Click on the Harbor Commission, and then find today's date, April 18th. Click on that, and you'll see the staff reports. Those reports will be up there for a month, and then come May, the May reports will replace them. But after May, if a person wanted to see this report and the details of this report, they can always call Ms. Brzezinski at 564-5519. That's 564-5519. So hopefully folks who want to see all the details of this report will be able to do so, and hopefully most of the meat of the report we'll be able to see here in this PowerPoint. So what are the main things we try to keep out of the bay? Waste, of course, is one of them. And so we always take a look at how we're doing on our metered sewage pump-out stations, all 5 of them in the harbor. And in FY12, the use was pretty near our 10-year average, about 7,742 minutes. They operated about 20 gallons a minute. And other notable items are the fact that we just received a $21,000 DBAW grant to replace 2 of the pump-outs. And we received a favorable inspection from DBAW in January of this year that they tested the operating speed and the overall conditions of the pump outs, and we got an excellent rating. We also try to keep the bilge water out of the bay, and as you know, one of the primary ways to do that is the use of our bilge water pump out station at the fuel dock. And our 2012 total gallons was about 78% of our 9-year average, and you'll see reflected in this slide and several other slides in this report, that's a downtick a little bit that we believe is reflective of 2 things. Number one, less cruising because of a downturn in the economy since 2008. Hopefully that's beginning to turn around. And also the phased Marina 1 construction projects, which has made transient berthing very scarce in the last few years. And thankfully, with Carl's engineering work coming up the next year, we'll be taking a break in construction, and hopefully we'll see more transient boaters and visitor boaters coming through Santa Barbara. Another way we keep oil out of the bay is with our oil pad distribution program. This number always is pretty amazing to me. We distributed an amount that was on our 10-year average last year, and that's 17,000 pads. And that's a lot of oil pads. And between this and the bilge pump out, I'm pretty convinced, having been here 13 years, that these 2 parts of the program are part and parcel as to why we see very few sheens on the harbor compared to, say, 15 years ago when bilge pumps would blurp out and what have you. I think there's a whole cultural change going on and a culture of responsibility. Another way we keep oil out of the bay is our waste oil disposal stations we make available. We have 3 of them, of course. We had Marina 2, 4, and on the fuel dock. And the gallonage for those was down predictably a little bit, just like the bilge pump outs. It's at about 88% of the FY 2000, 88% of the previous year's amount, and it's down a little bit. We believe because of the visitor boating is down a bit. but people are still using them and they still serve a great purpose. Marine battery collection down a little bit, about 84% of the 4-year average, but still our total that were deposited at the marine battery recycling station was nearly identical to the previous year. That's 290 batteries. And considering in Operation Clean Sweep we get 1 or 2 batteries a year, we believe that this is really keeping batteries out of the bay. It's so easy to drop a battery in the bay, but you know what? When you have a dock cart and this recycling station is right at the fuel dock, it's just as easy to take it up there, and we believe people are doing that. This one's pretty new, the fishing line recycling station. We have 3 of them. We used to have 3 rather low-tech ones, and not that this is high-tech, but this one is actually one that you can compact the line in it and mail it off to Berkeley Line, who recycles it. But this year we sent 24 pounds of recycled line out. And that may not seem like a lot, but if you weigh a piece of fishing line and add up 24 pounds of it, that's 24 pounds of it that's not getting entangled in birds. And so how do we test the water to make sure that it's not getting dirty from oil, sewage, and what have you? Well, as you may remember, we test in the dry season. We don't test in the wet season because it would give us erroneous values and be a waste of money because we're downstream of pollution sources coming our way out of the storm drains and what have you. So we test for between May and October for 3 primary bacterial indicators, and I'm happy to report that no samples at 7 different sites for 3 different indicators during that period of May to October exceeded state standards for body contact. So we had a good year on our water testing in the harbor. Same with East Beach. We've been testing since 2006. We test for heavy metals and for bacterial indicators. And again, our samples were consistent with baseline results from 2006, indicating that we've got good water quality in our East Beach mooring area. So our dissolved oxygen test, you may remember, we do this occasionally if it looks like, a fish are starting to do the little funky thing, like they're not too alive and active, or if we actually see dead fish. We test the water to make sure that dissolved oxygen levels are at levels that are good for sustaining marine life. We've had mostly good DO levels, except last year they were a little bit low in April and September. This corresponds with typical seasonal algae blooms. As you may recall, the big fish die-off in Redondo was in April of 2011. So April, we're almost, we're like halfway through April. We've been watching the water on an almost daily basis, and so far so good. But in case it does go south on us, we do now have a fish die-off response plan. We brought this to you last year. As you may remember, the director and I went down to Redondo after their massive fish die-off and learned from them how they used their incident command structure to respond to a fish die-off. And so I'd like to think we're better prepared now than we were before. And we actually have a plan with contacts and names and organizational directions in our emergency response plan manual. One of Carl's projects that deserves some mention in this report tonight was the replacement of a failing submerged sump tank in the Marina 1 East restroom. The original sump tank was taking on water. The restroom was built as part of the 1998 Marina expansion. And the reason it was taking on water was built with plastic that really didn't hold up over time. And so it sort of collapsed on itself. And Carl's staff, I believe it was staff, we didn't contract this. Was it your staff? It was a contractor. Thank you. We contracted to have a new fiberglass tank put in. But overall, it was one of the department's most complex projects. It was a difficult project because it is an underwater project, and it was difficult to get it done and not disrupt the integrity of the restroom facility and make sure we got a better sump tank in there. This deserves a standalone discussion, the Santa Barbara Dry Dock case closure. As you recall, this overwater haul-out facility existed for decades in Santa Barbara Harbor. It was always the subject of some discussion relative to its environmental wisdom, for lack of a better description. And that came to a head in 2002 going past the first bullet. The first bullet really tells the story that the Regional Water Quality Control Board staff recommended a case closure at a December meeting that Mr. Treiberg and I attended. I believe I reported briefly on that. But going back, the case stemmed from a 2002 boater complaint. A boater went to the Department of Fish and Game and complained about copper paint and batteries underneath the dry dock and the city pier. And so the Fish and Game's Oil Spill Prevention and Response Unit directed a dive survey at the dry dock, the city pier, and fuel dock, where they collected bulk sediment samples, and they directed staff to analyze heavy metals in the sediment and at the dry dock and other hot spots. And as a result, 6 batteries were removed from the city pier and fuel dock, and further tests were directed. So between 2004 and 6, core sample sediments were collected from the dry dock, the location of a former dry dock pretty much near K-Finger and the headwalk, of Marina 1, and at 2 storm drain outlets and at the city pier and fuel dock. And the findings from that effort were that the sediments of concern, and those were primarily organotins from tin-based paint known as tributyl tin, which was ultimately outlawed for small vessels in the mid-1980s, and copper, were pretty much localized below the dry dock. And another finding that was important was the fact that they were virtually immobile due to the fact that that sediment doesn't move, we don't dredge it, and we don't expect it to spread anywhere. And that the heavy metal compounds that were found, and they entered the harbor via typical boat maintenance, like at the dry dock. They didn't come from some kind of Superfund site offsite that rolled into the harbor and was contaminating the harbor. It was because of the dry dock, it was under the dry dock, and it wasn't going anywhere. So ultimately, regional board staff, citing relatively low risk with the site due to the removal of the dry dock, recommended no further action was warranted. They actually, at the December meeting at the state water board meeting, it wasn't a recommendation they asked for. They just explained that they were closing the case. And they also noted several of the reasons they were closing the case was because of the department's environmental compliance with battery removal, our overall Clean Marina program, Operation Clean Sweep, and our water quality testing program. So I'd like to think the case is closed on that. We have a few financial accounting issues we're wrapping up with the regional board, but in terms of the program itself, the case itself, I think we're past it, and I'm happy to say that. Anti-fouling paints is always an issue. This sort of is a segue from the discussion of the copper. Just as an update on the AFP or anti-fouling paint alternatives we've been trying testing on our patrol boats. In June of 2009, we tested a zinc biocide on Patrol Boat 3. That, of course, is our aluminum patrol boat. It's done well, and we've inspected it, we've reapplied it, and we believe right now it's a suitable replacement for copper-based paint. So until we're told that zinc is, equally or more toxic than copper, we're probably going to stick with that on Patrol Boat 3. It seems to be, from what I read and what the discussions in Clean Marina circles are, less toxic than copper, and the uptake is much less in the marine environment. On Patrol Boat 2, in September of 2011, we applied a zinc and patented Econia anti-fouling paint. Econia is a proprietary compound that is a non-copper biocide. The unfortunate part is the paint seems to wear off in areas of the boat experiencing high turbidity. That's typically around the running gear, the rudders, the propellers, and what have you. And it's really, we don't believe, suitable for patrol boats. So we are going to look at another test. We don't mind being experimental because I think it's important for us to lead by example. And so the next time we haul Patrol Boat 2, we're going to have a discussion about various alternative paints. And just as an example, there are a lot of them that are starting to come on the market that are copper-free. This one I thought was interesting. This isn't necessarily what we're going to use, but it's called EcoClad, and it operates on a biomimicry principle. What it does is it creates a film, like a fish would create a film on its skin, that you don't see perch swimming around with barnacles growing on them. It mimics that kind of, biological phenomenon, and claims, its manufacturer claims that the barnacles won't grow on it, and it's a non-copper paint. Very interesting. So there's obviously a lot of incentive for the paint manufacturers to be looking into these, and there are a lot of non-copper paints coming on the market, and we intend to try some of them. There's also legislation at hand. You may remember SB 623, Commissioner Friedman. We talked a lot about this in the past, and it was ultimately pulled by its author. It would have banned copper-based paints by 2015, but taking its place, the reasons are multiple, but part of it was because there were some methodology questions about it. Part of it was that the state wanted to determine some actual leach rates of copper. It gets fairly complex, but that bill was pulled. Another one has taken its place, AB 425, sponsored by an assemblyman up in San Francisco. It's working its way through the legislature now. This would require the Department of Pesticide Regulation to determine if copper-based paints should be registered as pesticides, and it would define control measures for those paints and be the responsible party for determining leach rates. So it sort of shifts some of that responsibility onto the Department of Pesticide Regulation. We continue to participate in the multi-state Clean Marina program, the industry-sponsored one. That's the flag you see flying under the American flag at the harbor. That's not a flag representing this program. That's a flag representing our participation in this multi-state program, and a flag representing our certification in that program. And we were first certified in 2006 and recertified in 2011. And the test for recertification is getting tougher and tougher. And we're very proud to be among the harbors that have been recertified as part of that program. And finally, we have our traditional stormwater pollution prevention plan and stormwater management plan. And this is a plan that describes all the potential stormwater discharge, sources at the harbor, garbage enclosures, parking lots, and the like. And we contract with SAIC to test the water quarterly and to test rainwater, wash water coming off the hardscape and what have you. And they report annually to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And again, I'm happy to report there were no significant illicit discharges in FY12. Pretty much same thing for the stormwater management plan. We completed this state-mandated plan in 2009, and it requires various what they call minimum control measures, which are very much like best management practices, public outreach, articles in dock lines. We had illicit discharge detection, which you're going to hear about in a minute, and various BMPs which support good water quality in the harbor. You may remember we added to the slip permits a requirement that you not use phosphate-based detergents on boats when you're washing them in the harbor. So we work closely with the regional board on these kinds of issues, and I'm happy to say we remain in compliance with them. The divers still remain certified for their underwater hull cleaning practices, and they're reaching the end of their initial certification, and so we're actually looking to host another training program in the harbor in June. That will be by the folks that did the first one, the California Professional Divers Association. They're based in San Diego. They're going to come up in June, and I have a couple new Harbor Patrol officers that haven't had the training, and we're going to recertify and retrain our business activity permit holders who are in the business of cleaning hulls. It's very important they do that correctly, or else copper goes into the bay. And our salad boat, of course, which is actually more of a salad walk. When they realized a few years ago they do better walking the docks than traveling in a skiff. Typical stuff this year, one unusual item, and that is birds. They removed 100 birds in FY12, unusually high, and it corresponds to I apologize. They removed 30 dead birds, and the Waterfront Department removed 100 dead birds. So we moved a lot of dead birds from the harbor this year. I'm not a bird expert. Maybe Commissioner Kramer could comment on that, but we do our best to get the dead birds out. There's not a lot we can do, and we get sick birds to the Wildlife Care Center every time we can. The rest is standard stuff: aluminum cans, newspapers, buckets, kelp, plastic, et cetera, et cetera. But we try to stay on top of it between our maintenance staff and the salad boat, and the salad boat comes every 2 weeks. Our abandoned watercraft abatement fund, it was a weak year for that because we had a weak summer. A weak winter. We were far below our 6-year average of 10 boats on the beach a year, so that's good news, although drought's not good news. It was strictly due to a mild winter. But that said, we had a $41,000 grant from AWAF grant from 2010 that we have finally exhausted. So we are just now beginning the process of applying for a $15,000 annual grant to carry us from July 1st through June 30th. The sister companion program to that is our vessel turn-in program. That's the program where folks have boats that they say, look, we'll turn it over to you, we'll give you the junk certificate, we'll give you the title, you get rid of it for free. It's a program by which we get boats before they end up in the anchorage and on the beach. It actually saves dollars. And we're working with a $10,000 grant right now. We had 2 VTIP boats disposed of in FY12. And we just learned today in discussions with DBA that we have funds left over, but instead of returning them to DBA, they have offered to let us roll that over for another year. So we have $6,800 in DBA funds in our VTIP program to last us another fiscal year. Operation Clean Sweep I discussed with you tonight. We look forward to seeing people down there on May 4th. That's exciting. We look curious to how much stuff we'll get out of the harbor this year. And we continue our boater education. Of course, we disseminate clean marina information through dock lines and the log newspaper, and we distribute literature. You see it in the foyer of our office. There's tons of literature about clean boating. And of course, we're always educating boaters with pollution packets describing best management practices for boating clean and green. Marine sanitation device inspections are part and parcel of keeping the bay free of sewage spills. They're required for all visiting boats and new slip and liveaboard assignments. We did only 640 MSD inspections last year, which is a direct correlation to fewer visiting boats, since every visiting boat has to get an MSD inspection. It was only 59% of our 10-year average. And pollution violations, there were 10 known violations last year. That's the fewest in 8 years. And there were only 2, 8 of them resulted in warnings, and only 2 relatively egregious citations, one for an oil discharge and one for dumping buckets of rotten bait into the harbor. So our costs. Last year, curiously, our costs were up a little bit, a few $1,000s over our 10-year average. And I looked into this in detail, and the best I could determine was that it was a function of some accounting issues, not errors necessarily, but accounting issues. Sometimes it depends on when we get billed from our contractors. And by the way, this is net cost to the department. These costs here, this is after grants and after AWAF and VTIP and grant-funded opportunities, and the bilge pads are free and what have you. This is cost to the department. But a lot of this cost is borne in the water quality testing phase to comply with our stormwater pollution prevention plan and stormwater management plan. And sometimes the billing for those plans may come at the end of one fiscal year and may show up as, like in FY11 may show up, it may not show up, and may show up in FY12 when it rolls over and then the bills actually get paid and posted in FY12. So I didn't find anything out of the ordinary fiscally in terms of prices going up or anything extra that we had to pay for. There were a couple extra cleanup events from the salad boat from wind events. When we're not getting rain, we're getting the cutoff lows, and there's tremendous windstorms below the low pressure areas, which cause a lot of palm fronds to end up in the harbor. So there were a couple extra salad boat efforts. But overall, I think we're in keeping with our expectations and costs. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, I think that the program continues to be an important contribution to our overall mission. It highlights the importance of maintaining a clean ocean clean ocean environment for all of us, visitors, recreationalists, fishermen, and as well as the marine and avian life that depend on it to thrive. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the report. I always look forward to it. Any questions, comments from the commissioners? Wow. I have a comment then. I would hope it could be on the city website. I appreciate that it's on the Harbor Commission agenda for a month and that people can call Jeanette, but I don't think that people will go to the website and then call Jeanette easily. It would be really, really good if it could be there on a regular basis, I think. Scott, you
Madam Chair, I do believe it stays on the website as archived video meetings, no? The video. Not the report, okay.
I mean, could you talk with the webmaster or whoever is in charge of this? And
Actually, that would be timely. We're just in the process, the final stages of revamping the entire city website, so
Okay.
this would be an
Well, maybe you-
opportune time to do that.
Can say there's a request that they be there in its new revamped form.
Sure.
That would be great. And you made a comment about the dead birds, and last year was a particularly difficult time for the seabirds and particularly the pelicans. And as far as I know, that there's no known reason why so many were dying. Partly it may be due to the increase in population. For instance, there are now quite a few pelicans up in Vancouver Island and Victoria Harbor, which is really quite unusual for this time of year, and so no one knows. And when there are more pelicans dying. So anyway, thanks for the report.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and we really appreciate the Wildlife Care Center's partnership on helping the animals, that are able to survive.
It's a good partnership. So now, Commissioner Banford, sorry.
Just one quick question. Thank you, Betsy. Mick, just on the program costs, see the dry season water quality testing, 1,100, not a whole lot. East Beach water quality testing, which I assume is year-round, 7,790. I'm just curious if there's any info on the disparity. Again, we're not talking big numbers, just kind of popped out.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bannerland, the East Beach mooring water quality monitoring is a requirement of our Coastal Commission permit. So we test for heavy metals and everything else, not just indicator bacteria. The dry season that water quality monitoring we do in the harbor, we test it through El Estero, through the city's lab, so it's significantly less. The tests for East Beach are done in the dry season as well, more or less, but they're just much more expensive tests. By the way, those tests, assuming we continue with clean results, that requirement goes away in a couple of years. So we negotiated that into the last permit. If we could continue demonstrating clean water quality, we won't have to continue with that.
Any other questions, comments from the Commission?